Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
It's easy to get lost in the latest true crime podcast or your favorite binge-worthy show. But what about your own story? That's the most important story of all, and therapy helps you write it. BetterHelp Therapy is 100% online and designed to be convenient and flexible enough to squeeze in between the next episode on your list. Get started today at betterhelp.com/pause for 10% off your first month.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Thomas Burke. He's a director, actor, editor, really jack of all film trades. Plus, he is a found footage encyclopedia, which is incredible. His latest feature, The Barbados Project, debuted earlier this year at the Unnamed Footage Festival Digital Edition. Thomas, hello!
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
For coming,
no,
joining
really
us,
glad to be
whatever.
Here. It's hard to think about The Barbados Project being my last film just because, like, you know, as filmmakers, a lot of the times when we put out these films, you know, we're waiting like a year or so until, like, you know, it gets through all those like specs or channels, if you will, so that, like, I've been working on so many since then that I almost forgot that was like the last thing that had come out.
Yeah, wait, how many projects are you working on right now before we dive into your horror history? Like, do you even know the number?
Not off the top of my hand, no. Because, like, some are really minimal involvement. Like, I've been doing a lot of voice work in Finland lately, working with a couple of filmmakers out there.
What? Okay. Cool.
Yeah, they ran this film festival. I kind of met them through that channel, but now, like, a lot of those people are working in the narrative film industry, which apparently Finland doesn't really have that big of a movie hub, filmmaker hub out there. So anyways, I really kind of like what they're doing out there. And so, yeah, so a couple of things I'm not like so heavily involved in. And so I guess that's kind of why it's hard to keep track sometimes.
Yeah. Well, so, okay, let's go back to the beginning. How did you get introduced to horror?
Good question. Well, my parents told me this, so I don't know, because I was way too young to remember. But when I like came home from the hospital, they said, like, of being born, that the first movie I ever saw was what's the Anthony Hopkins movie from '92 that won Best Picture?
Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lambs. Yeah. Sorry, it was just slipping there.
That little indie. Silence of the Lambs.
The only horror film to win Best Picture at the Oscars, I think. Or it wasn't even like so much classified as a horror film. Anyways, I kind of obviously started young. So my parents were always showing me like cool horror films. And I remember like Chucky scarred me as a kid, that, Pennywise from It, and just like all of these films that would literally haunt me in my dreams. And I kind of found that like thrilling. So I just, that's sort of really the start of what got me into horror film.
Cool. Wow. Okay. So you said your first horror film was Silence of the Lambs. Do you remember the first, what is the first horror movie like you really remember watching and like freaking you out?
Okay. Honestly, when I was a bit older, because like it's hard, especially like when you have learned to love the genre, it's hard to get like actually scared by the genre, I feel like, so I don't know. The first time I ever really felt scared by something was when I was a little bit older, like watching Sinister for the first time.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay.
And seeing that film, and like, which also, is like a found footage kind of hybrid sort of film. So a lot of those archival VHS style sequences that they cut to, I just, I, along with so many people, were just so freaked out by the realism of like the realisticness of it all that, I kind of walked away from that one being scared as shit, really.
Yeah.
So that almost even got me into found footage a little bit.
Oh, I was going to ask you, like, I was curious if that kind of got you into found footage with that style. But then, So as a kid, like, did you grow up watching a lot of horror movies?
It was a happy balance of like everything, okay. I'd say. I can admit that I haven't really even ever dove that much into classic horror or just classic movies in general. I've always more so been interested in like the more modern films that come out. So I have seen a lot of classic horror, but that has been a result of like more so me watching those recently rather than like growing up with them as a kid.
Okay.
A lot of like catching up to do. I've come to learn.
So, okay, you said it was like a happy balance, but what were the kind of movies you liked watching as a kid? Like, what were there some like kind of horror leaning stuff that you liked to watch, or you saw as a kid that really stuck with you?
I mean, it's not really a horror film, but I've seen like the movie Jumanji 100 times. That was like one of my favorites. I was like,
honestly, I would consider that kind of a horror movie. It's fucking scary.
Yeah, they got animals just like stampeding out of like a bookshelf or something like that, and the stakes are high in like every scene of that movie. So stuff like that. I'm trying to think what else. Like a lot of M. Night Shyamalan movies I did watch as a kid. So I always thought The Sixth Sense and Signs were extra spooky.
Oh, Signs ruined my life as a child. Like, Aliens scared the shit out of me, so that movie was just like, absolutely not.
And you know what really also freaked me out too is like the movie The Ring, but it was like less so the movie itself and more so that creepy ass shot they show in like the first act of that corpse in the closet, if you will.
The corpse in the closet. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Oh, that scarred me for sure.
Yeah. That's a moment. That's an indelible like horror moment for sure.
They kind of set themselves up like they really set the tone with that movie, because I've said this before that like it's a really successful movie, and not so much for being like out of this world crazy, because I mean the whole crux or premise of the movie is you watch a movie in 7 days and then you die in 7 days, and then so like that doesn't. The end of the film, that doesn't really change like over the course of the main objective. They try to survive the 7 days and then they die, right? So there's nothing really that surprising with the film, yet it's just still so amazing. And a lot of people found that to be. So, that's almost restored my faith in like non-original stories, like, sort of just kind of building on the suspense or the atmosphere, like, the way that The Ring did,
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, for sure. And so, okay, you said that Sinister, you said, was the first movie to really scare you. But
yeah,
do you still get scared of horror movies? Like, have you been scared like that since?
I get jump scared quite easily,
Yeah.
But like jump scared is just, it's a little bit different than like actually scared. And, I inadvertently like watched this. Like, there's a lot of cinema out there that's the word snuff film is not what I'm trying to get at here. But like, there is a lot of like films with real like archival, like mixed footage, like Faces of Death, you know, like we like from like the 70s, where they kind of like counterbalance that like real footage with simulated footage, and you almost don't know the difference, or you don't know that fine line. So like I've seen a couple of those types of films that really like freak me out, because some of it's real, and and most of the time you don't know what it is. So like only like extreme horror stuff kind of really freaks me out, but I don't know why I still check it out, but I'm acquainted with a few filmmakers that have like made a few of these things. So I've even gotten a job offer to work post-production on one, and I go, is the horror like simulated, or is it like some of it real? And when I found out it was, I didn't take the job.
911. 911. Uh-oh.
Well, you gotta understand too that like the film, like I don't know if you've heard of Charlotte's Net. That's the movie I'm referring to.
Oh.
And so you got like a filmmaker who's collecting footage from like the internet, right? And less so being the cameraman, if you will, right? So like he's not like committing these sort of like capturing these like morbid acts, if you will. He's more so collecting it and trying to prove a point of how like modern viewers and moviegoers are interested in the weirdest, most effed up shit today. It's kind of like his purpose in repackaging these like this media, basically. But that's not really where I fly. So I haven't.
Fascinating. That's wild. I'm just looking it up now. That's wild.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
But,
yeah.
Internet's got too many scary things on it. No, thank you.
That is very true.
And besides that though, like I have gone down a pretty deep rabbit hole of like Japanese style horror films, specifically like with found footage. And I'd say a couple of those really freaked me out, because they really rely, like at least Japanese style found footage. They rely pretty heavily on like very subtle sort of scares, like not necessarily like the entertaining horror where, you like they're really about trying to create these like spooky atmospheric moments. And so I've seen a lot of those films, and I really admire like the imagery that they have, because they just like, they always have the weirdest ghouls and goblins, man. Like it's fun stuff to watch, but it's also really creepy.
Do you have some examples of that?
Yeah,
I'm curious. Because I'm not as familiar with Asian found footage and that kind of aspect, except for like Gonjiam.
Yeah, right. That one is a great. I think it's Korean.
Yeah,
and I think they're remaking that too, which would be a mistake. But that's neither here nor there. So like, so Koji Shireishi is probably like one of my favorites, but also like one of the most well-known, more prolific like found footage Japanese horror style filmmakers. Like he's made Noroi the Curse, Occult, and A Record of Sweet Murder, which is like, it's crazy. That movie is shot in like 90% of it is shot in one continuous take, and they just kind of go all over with it. But besides like Koji Shireishi, there are a couple directors that I either can't pronounce the name of, or just like, I only remember like a small part of it. But the director of Tokyo Videos of Horror, also known as Yami Duga, he's dabbled in a lot of different found footage style franchises. And, it's only really come to my attention recently how many Japanese found footage franchises there are. Like this one called Honto ni Ada Noroi no Video. They have like over 100 feature films that are all in this like anthology horror.
Okay.
So they kind of do these like tape, like in the US we call them like tapes, like, tape number 1 or tape number 2 when we watch these anthology films. So they kind of like more or less do the same thing. And they, not only this one that I just referenced, but a lot of others do these like 6 or 7 segments per feature, and kind of put those out as like anthologies. But like they are so consistent with them that some of them have been around since the late 90s and are still being like shot today. So, Honto ni Ata is really good. Tokyo Videos of Horror. There's one called Not Found, which is found footage. There's Demon Files, and it's really hard to acquire these in the States.
I was just going to ask, how readily available are these?
You're so right. And, I'm a little obsessed with at least this style of film. So when I'm trying to watch it, there's really like the only way I can find them is on this Japanese alternative like YouTube, which is called Bilibili.
Okay.
So like I'll go on there, or sometimes Daily Motion, like some of these old school like streamer channels will have samples of these films. Otherwise you're going on Discord and trying to find like, people who are just going down the rabbit hole trying to find these things. So it is very hard to find.
Are you watching them without subtitles then?
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes I am. Yeah, unfortunately.
But it's still, I'm assuming that because it's horror and everything, that it still can be, can still pull you in, even though you probably don't understand the language.
Absolutely. Because like I work at Found Footage Critic. So I try to like, what I do there basically is like adding entries to our found footage database. So anytime I stumble across a film, I try to like gather or collect its data, and that sort of like enforces me to do like my homework or my research on something, because we have to provide these different criteria about a film. And so even if I don't get the subtitles to something that I'm like checking out, I always kind of like scour for critic reviews, and most of the time they're in different languages. So I'll kind of like run it through a Google Translator, and either while I'm watching the film or after I watch a film, I'll sort of like scrub through professional reviews just to kind of like make sure I gathered the story correctly,
Yeah.
Google Translate is great, by the way. I watch a lot of Turkish horror too.
Okay.
Okay. Turkey does have actually a surprising amount of like I think Dabe is a found footage franchise in Turkey.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah. A couple of those aren't found footage, but like the first one, if I'm not mistaken, is, and then they had like the third or fourth one that totally was as well, which were both really good.
So you talked about how Sinister was a little bit of a bridge into found footage, but like, what was the movie that really got you like, okay, found footage, like this is what I want to consume my every waking moment?
Okay, it's one of two, because everybody's first go-to answer is the Blair Witch Project, right? Typically, naturally speaking. So like when I was in high school, we were doing a little sleepover at a friend's house, and they had all my friends there had watched the Blair Witch Project before me, but they tricked me into saying like, this is real stuff, dude, like watch it, blah, blah, blah. So they all fall asleep, and I'm like the only one left awake watching the thing. No. And it just, it freaked me out so bad, because like I was only like 16 years old, so and I was just gullible as all hell, so I totally believed it, and that movie really freaked me out. But I did not know I wanted to be a filmmaker at 12, so I wouldn't necessarily say that like that's what got me invested in found footage. More so was like watching films like As Above, So Below, and being able to see how they're able to take a macro budget and invest that into found footage filmmaking. That movie ended up being one of the like greatest like achievements of cinema from a like a locations perspective, because they're the first movie to ever get real access to film in the catacombs. Like everybody else used to have to simulate those types of sequences if they're pretending to shoot there.
Right.
But As Above, So Below is like taking in cars and piano sets into that set, which is like totally crazy to think, but they got permission from the government to ultimately do that. And so, that movie is such a crazy journey, not only from a storyline perspective, but just from that physical journey / approach, like through the whole like scenery and, production design and atmosphere. That movie really, really kind of piqued my interest about found footage, because it was such a close-up, intimate perspective of being in the real catacombs, this sort of claustrophobic yet vast tunnel of space that to me opened up my eyes to like so much inspiration,
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So Mary Beth has said that you are a found footage encyclopedia. What is like your favorite found footage film? And then what is one that you don't think a lot of people have seen that you'd like to recommend?
Cool. Okay, I like
and that
this
people
question.
can find a little bit easier because Thomas, I know you got a lot of gems in the brain that you can find like illegally on the internet.
It's true. Okay, all right. So the one that's going to be a little bit harder to find, but is like, you know, still like, you know, you're able to find it in some places. It's just not on your typical Amazon for rent. But it's a movie from Mexico called 1974, La Posesión de Altair.
Mary Beth's talked about this one before.
It's so phenomenal. Like, besides it being shot in this sort of, like they shot it on an actual film camera, but besides the fact of it having that sort of sinister VHS stylized imagery, you know, it's just, they have just such a powerful story that you go into it thinking it's one thing. Like, you think it's a possession story. This husband is documenting his wife, who's just been, you know, they've just been married, and she starts like acting really weird. So I don't remember if that's why he's documenting her, but he's ultimately documenting their day to day. And she's just getting weirder and weirder, and more anomalies are starting to happen around the house. But like, it's really where they take all that I think is just so bonkers, crazy, amazingly good, because I just didn't see it coming. I don't think a lot of people will see where that movie ends up coming.
It's very good. I have it right on my desk because all of my found footage movies are on my desk with me because I'm a psychopath. But yes, you can buy it from Cauldron Films.
I was going to ask,
so
is that the Cauldron
available.
Films release?
This is the Cauldron Films release. They did it with the Collingwood story. So you can buy it, finally.
I have the Cauldron Films version too. I'm showing now mine on the screen.
Because I think it was Unnamed Footage Festival who showed Possession de Altair. That was where I saw it for the first time.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I know they did show it. That's kind of like how it got on my radar. But, you know, I didn't become acquainted with the festival until last year or two. But they had like a really crappy version on YouTube for a while, and I initially watched it there. But then, when Cauldron Films announced that they were releasing like a hard copy version, I was definitely jumped at that pre-order right away. It's just a really good film, and like that one was borderline scary for me. Like that one borderline actually scared me.
Oh yeah, and again, it goes to some absolutely wild places. Like, does not go where you think it's going to go, and it's incredible.
And you know, to sort of answer your other question, which was like, what would be like a more like mainstream stuff? I don't know if mainstream is the right word, but like something more generally viewable that, you know, I would almost correlate this to even an earlier question, which was like, what are some movies that actually scare you? I would say that the same director of As Above, So Below, his first found footage movie, which is called the Poughkeepsie Tapes, that movie really freaked me out. And I would also recommend that one too, because like, if you are a fan of found footage, odds are you've watched a couple like violent crime stories. You know, not necessarily every found footage is your ghost in a haunted house type of scenario. You know, usually it's like a sociopathic killer who's like stalking his victims, or, you know, basically just saying like there's so many violent crime stories riddled in the found footage genre that like the Poughkeepsie Tapes just kind of feels like the most authentic and really scary types of violent crime stories I've come across.
It's
fun. And it's like a mockumentary too. So it's really interesting.
It's booked up. It's one of my favorites. I just bought a t-shirt from it because I'm crazy.
Nice.
Look, Thomas is my found footage bestie. We text about found footage a lot, so this is very exciting. But Thomas, I want to know like how you wanted to get into filmmaking, because you watch found footage, you talk about it, you work for Found Footage Critic, but like you are also heavily involved in the found footage filmmaking scene, and you work on so many projects with directors like Isaac Rodriguez. So how did you get involved in the movie making side of all of this?
Cool. So I've been, you know, I just turned 30, so I'm not that old, but I guess I'm also not that young either. So about 10 years ago, I got an opportunity to study filmmaking in France for 30 days. We were going to be joining like a skeleton crew.
Oh, wow.
And basically filming this documentary about restoring churches. Like basically there's these churches during like World War II that got all destroyed from, you know, the warfare, if you will, that like we were basically kind of going in and filming interviews and capturing coverages of these churches and whatnot to kind of say like our point being we want to preserve these historical landmarks and not bulldoze them down, if you will. So like we made this successful documentary. We ended up reaching our goal of like basically helping out these, preserving these churches, that I ended up wanting to like really take filmmaking seriously.
Okay.
Because I was like, oh, cool. Here's like a prime example of film having an impact. Like I was able to kind of see it very quickly and very firsthand, that I did jump into the ring pretty just quickly and was like, okay, I don't really know that much about filmmaking besides a quick crash course. So I studied and just kind of, did my thing for like 10 years. And over that time, I got really invested in the found footage genre. So I made a short film called Camping Fun, where it is basically just a 13-minute short found footage. And around the time I came to releasing that, the pandemic hit. And rather than, me sort of like kind of figuring out like, what the hell am I going to do? I more so like went back to my mental like bucket list, where like these things that I wanted to achieve for myself. Like, oh, I wanted to really learn sound mixing or sound design one day, or I really wanted to kind of take editing a little bit farther into this direction. I really kind of hunkered down that year and just learned as much as I could about like the post-production technical processes, that like when I put out Camping Fun, I was kind of like, what's next? And one thing I had never done before is like market a movie, because I think a lot of times first time filmmakers will figure out how to make a movie, but they won't really spend too much time learning or attempting to sell or just like put out a movie,
Yeah.
They'll just drop it on YouTube or try sending it to a couple festies and call it a day. But like, there's so much more to trying to get your film out there, that I really learned that process too. And so I think it was more so like learning how to market oneself to that really kind of introduced me to a lot of other found footage filmmakers. It kind of got me into the Found Footage Critic and POV horror world, where then I met a lot of filmmakers and just working with like the distribution part of that company. But then like, just as a fan, really just like finding a lot of other filmmakers that like were doing a lot of the same things, that it opened a lot of doors to just meeting so many people with like the same sort of interests. So it's not like I've sort of devoted myself to found footage filmmaking, but I have just worked on so many of them. But I really do love, the genre.
So speaking of found footage and the genre, can you tell our listeners a little bit about the Barbados Project and how you got involved with it?
Sure. Okay. So the Barbados Project was under original title called The Trident, The Land We Call Home. And it is the first sort of Barbadian creature feature to be shot entirely in the country of Barbados. And so I had heard about this movie for a while. And I think even at one point, like back in 2018, there was a copy of this movie on YouTube.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
The production part of it actually was like recorded a pretty long time ago. And our distributor at POV Horror, which I'm an editor on, or like I do a lot of like quality checking for, movies that kind of come through our queue line or whatever. We came across the Barbados Project, and I had like an assignment to basically just sort of do like one or two cleanup moments on the film and just, get it to be released. And I watched the film, like having already watched it the year or two before, but I watched it like with a different lens cap on, knowing I was going to be putting a little bit of work into the post-production part of it. Mm-hmm. And I saw so much potential with the movie that I wrote this really long letter to my boss, my distributor. And I just kind of like told him how much I really admired the film and how much I think that, if you give me a couple of months to work on this, that, I could really kind of maybe help improve the film or at least just kind of help boost some of its, flaws or whatever. So they kind of let me do that. They sort of gave me these reins to spend a lot of time with it in post-production. And the other filmmaker, the director, the original director of the film, had a lot of other productions that he was shooting during this time. So like they sort of appointed me as a co-director to do some pickup sequences. Okay. And basically kind of like man the whole post-production department. So that's kind of how I got attached to the movie. And I guess maybe I should have started with what the plot line is, but the plot line is basically about a group of journalists who are trying to uncover a conspiracy involving monsters that are allegedly roaming the island of Barbados. They've been told nothing, but there's all these videos surfacing online of people capturing different sized creatures and monsters. And it's kind of like they kind of this group of journalists band together to disclose or uncover what's kind of going on behind the scenes. And there's this, kind of evil corporation or evil military government, that sort of sector that's trying to keep this all, hush hush, if you will. So our movie kind of goes down this journey, and we find out that these monsters have been traveling from like parallel universes using portals and wormholes to gain entry into our universe. So it's a really trippy movie, and we go into the past, present, and future, and there is certainly like a lot going on, and we do show quite a few different kind of monsters throughout the movie.
Yeah.
So
it's a kaiju picture. I was surprised at the fact that there were these giant monsters in it, because I don't know, you don't see that a lot in like low budget like found footage movies. It's so I was really surprised that it has like this epic scope to it for a movie that, as you said, is shot entirely in Barbados and is, a low budget film.
Totally. And, we even had like just a ton of extra footage that we didn't really know what to do with. Like, there's a couple, sly moments that we tried to like take, just let's say a cool monster composition, figure out a way to implement it into the narrative. But a lot of these unused monster moments are actually like laid out in our credit sequence. Where my friends at the Overlook Hour podcast, they also run the Unnamed Footage Festival. I basically coordinated with those guys to say, hey, I'm going to be emailing you a bunch of just miscellaneous monster footage, and I want you guys to just kind of like watch it and talk about it, pretending like this is somebody sending you hypothetical real footage, and we'll just go with that. And so that was kind of a way for me to take that extra unused monster footage and be able to kind of really just, go out with a bang, if you will.
That's cool.
So cool. Like, that's so fucking cool. Like, found footage is neat and so cool and collaborative, and it's awesome when, you're able to get involved in a project that you believe in. Like, that's just, and found footage in Barbados, a movie from Barbados. I feel like we don't really even see or talk about, like, that country is having a horror scene, so it's really fucking cool that you were able to help get a movie like this out into the world, even more so than it already was.
Thank you. Yeah, it is really cool. And like you just mentioned earlier, like filmmaker Isaac Rodriguez. I've always looked up to him because he's works in Texas too, in the same state as me. So like I've actually heard about his work for years because a lot of our stuff would play at the same festivals over the last 5 or 6 years, but I actually just got to work with him on this last movie, A Town Full of Ghosts. So like, that's just like, another opportunity that I was like, man, one day I'm like looking up to these guys, like, cause Isaac's he's really a found footage encyclopedia too, cause he's watched so many of them, but really he's made like a ton, almost like a dozen.
So many fucking movies, like found footage movies. It's Last Radio Call came out this year, and so did A Town Full of Ghosts. Like, and almost back to back movies.
Oh, and there's Mr. Creep, which he just finished principal photography with. Of course he did. It's a clown. Yeah, it's a clown killer found footage movie, and I also acted in it too. I basically joined him for like 2 days on the set, but it was really fun. Also really creepy. Also, I'm just super excited to see it.
I remember your voice is in A Town Full of Ghosts. I was like, wait, is that Thomas's voice in A Town Full of Ghosts? Like at the beginning, right?
I almost forget. Yes, I almost forget that.
Your voice is in it. And I was like, I know that voice.
Totally. A lot of horror movies will have an opening scene where, it just kind of sets the tone for the movie, where you'll follow a set of characters that may not be your protagonist or, help you towards the central storyline, but just more so like, those tone setters or the pacers. So like I kind of, I joined that production too from just like doing some voice work, being like the cameraman behind the scenes. And we do this cool little death scene in the opener.
Hell yeah. Okay. So we have chatted with you about, we could talk about found footage forever, but this is not a found footage podcast, even though I should have a found footage podcast, but that's neither here nor there. Thomas, what movie are we talking about today that scarred you for life?
Oh, okay. Edward Scissorhands.
Edward Scissorhands. Oh my god. So, I'll read a quick synopsis of Edward Scissorhands, aka a movie that ruined a bunch of our lives. A scientist, played by Vincent Price, built an animated human being, the gentle Edward, played by Johnny Depp. I know he's not a great person, but this is 1990, so I'm just acknowledging that off the bat now. The scientist dies before he can finish assembling Edward, though, leaving the young man with a freakish appearance accentuated by the scissor blades he has instead of hands. Loving suburban saleswoman Peg, Diane Wiest, discovers Edward and takes him home, where he falls for Peg's teen daughter, played by Winona Ryder. However, despite his kindness and artistic talent, Edward's hands make him an outcast.
Oof.
So, Thomas, why is this your Scarred for Life pick? Tell us your horror story, how old you were when you first saw this, what scared you the most about it, everything.
Well, first, that was a good delivery on the synopsis. I like that. And,
wow, thank you so much. Copy and pasted off of the internet.
Yeah. So I have a very vivid recollection of watching this movie when I was a kid. I grew up in New Jersey, and I lived most of my life in Chicago before actually moving to Texas. But right when I was making this transition from New Jersey to Chicago, I guess my young sort of brain was just really like trying to take in like a whole new world, if you will. And I remember that first week I was watching Edward Scissorhands at night, and I think my parents had they just like walked into the other room, or were just kind of like letting me watch it by myself. And they told me that I basically like stormed out of the place crying. And what ended up happening is that, like, I guess when I was watching the third act, if we recall that moment when like, Edward, like he's basically like kind of been shunned by the society in which he tried entering. And he kind of, cowers back to his lair. And then Winona Ryder kind of comes along, and she's just there trying to console him. But it's that ex-boyfriend that just kind of like gets back, he follows her there, and he pulls out a gun, and it's like the stakes are high as all hell at this, he just got, exiled by the whole community. His chance at love is disintegrating. And then the boyfriend's coming in all, guns blazing. And that scene where basically Johnny Depp's character pushes, the boyfriend out the window. Like, it was that moment that really like effed me up, man. Like, cause as a kid, I was just very vulnerable and kind of like looked at that as, as not being simulated. I was like, man, this was real. That was like a real like window push to me, or like a real death to me that, I never really like watched the end of the movie to kind of like get that sense of like, this is like a lighthearted, drama, sort of like, just family style film that, I never really got that chance because I had just run out of the room before it got all happy again. And, so anyways, that's kind of like the reason why it really scarred me.
Wow.
How old were you? Do you remember?
I think, I was 5 or 6.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Okay. That'll do it. That will do it. So after you saw it, like, how did it affect you after? Like, did you have nightmares, or you were just really upset in the moment and didn't want to watch it again, kind of situation?
I've had similar types of nightmares, but like those would be like from different dreams are weird just because it's a whole hodgepodge of like everything kind of going on. Like, I think I would be in like those kinds of settings for like a nightmare or whatever, but I only remember a Chucky nightmare that really like haunted me as a child, and then like one with the Grinch, where the Grinch instead of him stealing toys, he was like stealing children, basically.
Wow.
I remember those dreams like they were yesterday.
Wow.
That's wild. Well, Terry, I want to hear your Scarred for Life story about Edward Scissorhands, because you've been teasing me a little bit about this, and you sent me a TV spot, so I want to hear how your first experience with Edward Scissorhands when you saw it.
Okay, so All right, so I'm going to listeners. I'm going to insert the TV spot so you can hear what I'm talking about.
This Christmas, from the director of Beetlejuice.
I just stare, dear. Can I bring show and tell on Monday?
Laugh with Edward.
Whoa, it's a heck of a handshake you got there, Ed. Come on, let's get you sharpened up.
Edward, would you?
I'll be darned.
Edward Scissorhands.
We don't want him rusting up on us now, do we?
Rated PG-13. Now playing.
Thomas, basically, and I know Mary Beth has heard it because I played it for her, but basically, so I was like 9 years old when this came out. I remember seeing the TV spot for this movie, like clear as day in my mind, because it has a lot of Christmas music, and it plays up the comedy of it. It shows the scene of Edward kind of poking the waterbed and him being helpful. They're washing off his scissors, and it's like presenting it as a family film, and it's saying like laugh with Edward. Like it's like funny. This is lighthearted. This is so not serious at all. So that TV spot was in my mind because I played an awful lot. And then I really wanted to see this, but my parents wouldn't let me because they said it's about a man that pokes people.
Sorry.
I love that.
And so my 9-year-old brain had this image.
What your parents were saying about that? That was bad. He pokes people.
So you're looking at me as like a poke killer.
Well, in my mind, I was like, this is juxtaposition of this really sweet, very family friendly like TV spot that is happening that I'm seeing constantly, just because at that time it's like you watch TV, these ads are like running constant loop, especially on kids stuff. And so like this was like being portrayed all the time, where I'm having my parents tell me no, and I see his blades, and then my parents tell me no, he is walking around, and they would do this maneuver of him like moving his hands forward, and I was like, it's so weird to me what kind of gets in a kid's head, because like at this point I had seen Nightmare on Elm Street, and he has like, blades for hands and the slashing people, but there's something about this that gave me actual nightmares. I remember as a kid being terrified of this weird ass Johnny Depp looking motherfucker just like coming in and moving his hands back and forth as if he's like gonna poke me. And so I never saw this movie as a kid. I didn't see this movie until probably late 90s, early 2000s at some point. So I was like in my, late teens, 19 or 20, around that time frame.
Okay.
I see what you're saying, because like, man, if you just look at his outfit without even like having any context of the movie, gosh, like even just the outfit is scary.
Yeah, it's a weird juxtaposition of this trailer again presenting this very kishy Christmas happy family movie with like his weird ass outfit, these monstrous claws, like the design work on his scissors is just phenomenal. But yeah, and so I didn't see it until I was, I don't know, 19, early 20s, and when I saw it, I was like just taken aback at how utterly beautiful the movie is and how like soul crushing it is. Because
it's a very
like really
unorthodox movie. Like, you just don't see much. You don't see much like it. And it's funny you mentioned the music too, kind of like embracing that family style picture. And I rewatched it recently just before coming on, just because I wanted to just pick up anything I might have missed, because it really has been a while since I watched it. Mm-hmm. And I do remember, like, I've seen it a couple times, obviously, but like in the later years, I really admired the score and the music in the film. But like rewatching it just the other day, I was like, man, this is one of my favorite soundtracks, despite the fact that it's literally just a bunch of oohs and ahs mixed together.
This is, I honestly, I think this is Danny Elfman's one of his greatest compositions. And I saw it the one time again when I was like late 19, early 20s, like that time frame. And I hadn't seen it since then, but the moment I sat down to watch it, I was just like taken back by how majestic and whimsical and just how beautiful this composition is. Like Danny Elfman puts out phenomenal music, but like I do think this is one of his best.
Yeah, certainly.
It's just very stirring.
It's like, it's so fun. It's so interesting too, because like his music so perfectly fits the Tim Burton aesthetic. And I mean, maybe it's because they've worked together on so many projects that they're so intrinsically linked in my brain. But there's just something about the way he uses like horns and the way he creates like sinister yet whimsical sounds and makes normal things seem scary. It's just incredible, because I think that's a thing that Tim Burton does with a lot of his aesthetic, is making things like, I really, this time I watched it, really like kind of focused on this neighborhood that looks beautiful and perfect, but this music that he uses, especially when all the dads are pulling out of the driveway, it's kind of scary.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
The fear of this suburban kind of cookie cutter lifestyle, which I thought was also interesting though, because it's so colorful. Like, I think when I think of like suburban representation in movies, it's usually the same manicured lawn, but it's not as colorful. And this representation is very colorful. Like the houses are pink and green and everyone is wearing bright colors. But I like that just because they have this bright aesthetic does not mean that they are like in any way like enlightened about like the world or anything. But they just, it creates this interesting contrast. So then we get Edward, who's in all black, and his leather, which we need to talk about, his leather outfit. It sets this really interesting visual contrast in your brain that you're like, oh, okay, so the colors, like, you know, bright colors are happy, but here we're playing more with that expectation of bright, colorful pastel vibes, basically.
Juxtaposed with the Gothic castle up on the hill. Like, you know, it's like...
that fucking castle! Like... Oh, okay. There's a beautiful manicured lawns, colorful houses, and then a fucking castle on a hill. Incredible. Like a Hammer horror movie. Just a giant dilapidated castle out of nowhere with giant gates and full of dust and cobwebs and a man with scissors for hands.
And, you know, let's not forget too the their bust style like lawn art canvases. You know, like he takes all the grass and will cut them into like beautiful looking like bust sculptures. Like those are creepy as too, because they're faceless and they're they're just vague and ambiguous. It's really weird, but it's still
funny
cool.
because they're creepy, but also like they give personality to everything. Like finally there's like an individuality to everything because he's making these creations for everybody. So they're creepy. Like Winona Ryder's like, this is fucking weird. Like I don't like all these weird things.
Yeah, it shows that his character has a lot of empathy. You know, I texted you a picture when I watched the movie, and I was like, man, look at this little insert shot that they just have, because it's like a boy who's born without eyes, and it's just like, it's a creepy little news clipping photo that they just panned across when Winona Ryder's investigating the land or the house. And like, it's just a subtle moment, but I was like, man, there's even just creepy backstory lore to like this film.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, what's a little factoid is that I'm always curious when you see like such a specific aesthetic in terms of like a housing area. They apparently went to Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay area of Florida, and painted the houses these pastel colors.
I was wondering that.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, the production designer. The production designer, Bo Welch, said that they found a kind of generic plain wrapped suburb, which we made even more characterless by painting all the houses in faded pastels and reducing the window sizes to make it look a little bit more paranoid. So they actually changed the houses in this suburb. And I'm curious, did they paint it back when they were done, or how did they? What did they do? Is there like a little weird ass suburb outside Tampa that is literally like, you know,
that's a good question.
Edward Scissorhands suburbia.
I noticed how interesting that was too. Like, because I thought to myself, I go, man, this looks too good to be just, you know, some sort of green screen backdrop or whatever. I was like, this has got to be all practical.
Yeah, and then so like they apparently made the facade of the Gothic mansion, and they kind of just placed it there, and then they filmed the interior shots on like a sound stage, but. It's so weird because it feels like it doesn't feel real. It feels like it is literally like someone, you know, a lot of times, particularly in a lot of Hollywood movies, they would have like an area that was like fenced off from everywhere that they would, you know, and this feels like a set. It doesn't feel like a real place. And I think it kind of gives that feeling of the artificial nature of this suburbia that's hiding kind of a rotten nature underneath.
It's like a liminal space. It feels like a liminal space, especially like when they go to like, it's weird because when they go to like the shopping center where the barber shop is, it doesn't feel as much like that. But when you're at where the houses are, the neighborhood. It doesn't feel real. Like something about it feels very wrong. And especially this time watching it, I was like, ugh, something just feels off. And maybe because I already knew it was coming, but it just, the vibe is so bizarre. And in a good way, but it's like this very bizarre vibe that Burton strikes with this movie.
It kind of sets itself up for that, Grinch Who Stole Christmas or like Lemony Snicket sort of like style story where you got like a person or a protagonist who's just shunned out from the rest of society, but still lives in, just on the outskirts of society. And, for this coming out, in the 90s, I think, or early 90s?
90,
yeah. That's just, we didn't really see those kinds of films coming out during that time. So, even though this is a certain stylized sort of like narrative, I think it was like kind of one of the first of its kind to come out, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And what I found really interesting on this rewatch too is the kind of bored housewife trope where it's like all of these women, they're stay-at-home moms kind of, and some of them don't have kids. So they're just kind of kept women almost. And they are so bored that they're looking for any kind of thing that is going to happen that they can, do their little call circles and go stand in the corner. Yep, I'll meet you at the corner. I'll meet you at the corner. And so then they all of a sudden, the rumor builds just because Peg has someone in the car with her and they're like, who is it? Yeah. Who is this person in the car with them? And everyone has to know. And so then they all kind of congregate outside of Peg's house until it's nighttime and the husbands arrive. And then they all just sort of like disperse like cockroaches back to their homes. It's such a weird image of like everyone coming home at the same time, everyone dispersing like, oh, well, the menfolk are home, we gotta go. And then the next morning, the menfolk all leaving at the same time. It's such a, I don't know. I think there's a slight like social kind of discussion going on there.
Yeah, I think certainly so. It kind of insinuates that these people have never really left their small town to gain like a somewhat of a world perspective. It feels almost culty in a way where like, they just never leave their town. They follow these like rules or guidelines to, whether, it's not ever said or insinuated, but like, maybe there's rules to what color house it has to be painted, right. Or, just like kind of like thinking to why is this hermit town so weird? It just makes you wonder.
Yeah.
Well, and watching it this time, I was able to kind of put to words a lot of how I feel about this movie. So I saw this movie one time when I was younger and never have watched it again because this movie upset me so much and made me so sad and so emotional that like I didn't want to watch it again. It was like too much for my brain because Edward to me is like a really sad fucking character. And I saw a lot of myself in Edward when I was watching it as a kid because like Edward is coming in and he's like an object that everyone's like oohing and eyeing over, but he's still weird. And I felt like that a lot in my family, like where I think there was a part of me, this is going to sound really fucked up, but like I was the only girl and I was like, I liked school. So I was kind of looked at as like, oh, that's the smart girl in the family. And she's a fun thing to look at. And they weren't mean, but like I'm reducing it to that. But it felt like there was something about me that people liked because I like fit in a certain box, but I myself did not. Like I got bullied a lot. I didn't feel like I fit in. I always felt like the weird kid. And so something about Edward really spoke to me in terms of like, it's not feeling like you belong, but people still looking to you for something that you can give them. And that breaks my fucking heart with him because this kid, how old is he?
Okay, that's another question I have. I want to talk. I definitely want to dig into after you finish your story.
So it was just like this, him being ogled and oohed and awed over, and then everyone turning on him so fucking quick when he made one mistake. And like, this is getting emotional and I apologize. This like, I see something in kind of my trajectory as an adult where like I was treated like a golden child by my family, and when I got getting tattoos and piercings and decided to do my own career path that wasn't necessarily what aligned with them, they completely stopped like asking me about my work, and I wasn't as interesting to my family anymore, which is fucked up and not good. So like watching this movie now, I was like, Jesus Christ, like I feel kind of like Edward Scissorhands, which I know sounds silly, but like he so desperately just wants to be taken care of or like acknowledged and treated like a normal person, but he really is just something to be ogled at, and a thing to deliver a service or a feeling or
commodification
something.
of weirdness, right?
Yes. Like, and what really stuck out to me again is like they put him in the dad's suit, Alan Arkin's
channeling
suit.
Christopher Walken in this role for me.
But they put him in the suit to make him look like one of them, but he's so obviously, like, his hair is so crazy, he's got the scissor hands, so it's like this trying to mask. And I think it also comes down to my queerness, and I know that Terry, you put something in our notes about queerness and how, like, Edward is such an incredible stand-in for both representations of queerness and how you feel trying to fit in, but also I read a really fascinating interpretation of him representing high-functioning autism and not being able to, like, you know, you don't fully understand social cues, or you take things pretty literally. Like, there's a lot going on with Edward where you just the outsider and you feel for him and what he wants to be, but then he becomes, like, what fucked me up at the end is when he becomes the monster that he's been trying to avoid becoming. And but he becomes a monster, but he's trying to protect. Like, you know, it's like, it's not like he's evil. He's just like, I'm fucking done with you treating me like this and you just threw the love of my life down and tried to hurt her. Like, fuck you. Like, it wasn't even an accident. He, like, very purposely like, nope, fuck you. And that also freaked me out. Like, whoa, like, what does that mean that you can be capable of when you're pushed like that? And I think I didn't really know how to word it in my small child brain when I saw it, but I think it was all percolating in terms of, like, I feel different. I don't know why I feel different, but am I going to snap someday and then have to be alone because of my difference?
That's a good point. It generates so much catharsis. It does so much catharsis building, but, like, I was going to share that I thought, like, one of the most frustrating scenes for me was it's a really subtle moment, but it's like, it's when Edward's getting talked to by police, and they're basically just like, him and the family the police and the family are just trying to, like, teach him morality. They're trying to basically say, like, this is what's right, this is what's wrong. They're trying to, like, give him these scenarios, like, what would you do if you find money on the ground? Yeah. Would you give it to your loved ones, or would you, you know, return it to the police? And so, like, they're trying to teach him this lesson by, like, and, you know, and they're having this family fight about it by, like, some are just trying to be like, no, Edward, that's a good answer. But, like, they're getting shut out by being like, no, Edward, like, you're wrong. Like, your moral compass is off cue. And it's like, you know, who are they to kind of sort of tell him what's right and what's wrong? Where, like, you know, his heart is on his sleeve and he's really kind of doing everything the right way, but he's being told that he's not. And I thought that was, like, you know, really frustrating.
Yeah, I even took a note down because Bill says, we're not talking nice, we're talking right and wrong. Because, you know, Kim tries to stick up for him, saying, like, well, maybe, you know, it would be nice if he gave the money to his loved ones, because that shows, you know, that he cares. And the idea from Bill is that there is right and there is wrong. There is the suburb and there is the house on the hill. There is us and there is them. Like, it's such a binary way of thinking about things that just sort of heightens that feeling of isolation for this character who's really trying to understand how to fit in with the society that doesn't really care about him. The only thing they care about is what he can do for them. And there's, you know, we were talking a little bit earlier about empathy, and there's a line in here that just really, like, hit me with Peg, because Peg seems like a really, you know, caring person. But then there's the line where she talks to Kim, and Kim, you know, finally sees him for the first time and freaks out. It's a really funny scene. But then Peg says, he can't help the way he is. Have a little sympathy. And I think this idea between sympathy and empathy is such a interesting kind of distinction here, because sympathy implies, especially the way she says it, implies, like, pity him because he's not like us. And so there's like this almost, even with Peg, who comes across as this very caring person that's trying to do stuff, is actually doing things because she pities him as opposed to wants to understand him. And I feel that is, like, something that happens a lot in this movie with all of the characters that just see him as pity and want to fix him. There's that line when he's on television where they're like, you know, if you could have real hands, would you? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, but then you wouldn't be special. And all they can see is this kind of commodification of what he can do for society, for this little suburb, as opposed to allowing him be himself and be who he wants to be.
That's a good point. Yeah, you really just don't get more fish out of water than a man who's born with scissors for hands.
Right. And
but like,
and leather.
And what's even more, and like again, that really speaks to how I think I'm not on the autism spectrum, but like the way I've heard people talk about people that are neurodivergent, that have autism or some kind of like a disability of some sort, they like have some sympathy, they can't help it, but they don't have the empathy. Like instead of treating them like people, they see them as something different than a person, which is incredibly harmful, ableist, and terrible. But I think that still happens today, the way a lot of society treats anyone with a disability.
It does. I get excited. I get excited when I see these types of stories being told in film, because like they, viewers are smart enough for themselves to, understand a point, if you will, that like it is nice to kind of see films like this, because then it helps you just gain that maybe perspective you would have otherwise had a preconceived notion not for, or anything like that. So, Edward Scissorhands, or just so many of these other like melancholic dramas that really kind of like showcase a fish out of water, just somebody who's completely different from the rest of society. Those stories are not only important, but they're just, they're really like, they really pull at the heartstrings.
Yeah. What I like about this conversation is that we're kind of talking about the different ways that we can view Edward. And I think it's because the character of Edward comes from a very authentic place. The genesis of it came from when Tim Burton was a teenager and he had drawn this thin, solemn man with long, sharp blades for fingers, and was talking about how it reflected his feelings of isolation and being unable to communicate with people around him in suburban Burbank. And there's a quote saying, "I get the feeling people just got this urge to want to leave me alone for some reason. I don't know exactly why." And so there's this idea of not fitting in with society. And I think that it comes from such an authentic place because it's born from his own experiences, that I think for a lot of outsiders or people that have been othered by society for various reasons, whether it's queer, whether it's being autistic, or whether, whatever the case may be, I think we can all sort of see ourselves in that character and sort of see our trauma represented in that character. And it's a powerful movie. I remember when I first watched it finally as an adult, it just really devastated me because I was still in the closet at that point. And it just reminded me that like how lonely it can be, because like he tries to find love and he can't have her, and he can't have that love. And he is forced to kind of go back into the closet by the end of the movie, where everyone's okay as long as they don't have to think about him. His weirdness was okay as long as it's a commodity that they could, utilize. But the moment that he became too weird, or it was like, oh, his true colors are showing maybe, or, oh, there is some kind of otherness to him that we can't ignore, then it becomes like, okay, we're going to know that you exist at some point, but we don't ever want to see you. And so, like, I think for like, from a queer perspective, and there was this article that I posted last year on my site from Angel Melanson, who now works for Fangoria, and she was talking about how this movie, how she always considered herself to be Edward, and how she had scissors for hands, and that she was afraid she was going to live a life of loneliness as a lesbian, that she couldn't love the person that she loved. And so there's like so much of like heartache that comes in this character that I think, depending on where you come from in life, you can still see yourself in that character. And I think that's really powerful. That's
so interesting that's like more or less how Tim Burton came up with the idea. It just kind of proves the point at like, there's this preconceived notion that like some of the best stories are the ones that either are relevant in, society, like the stories that are relevant to society or the current events, or conversely, like ones that, build from experience or memories. And like, it just kind of proves how effective this movie is. Cause I don't think, it's one of those like really high rated films and really, well, just received and talked about movies that like, I'm not surprised that that's how this movie got conceived, but like, it's still just, that's such a really cool fact, because it just more or less proves its point for telling like a really meaningful, authentic story.
Yeah. Oh, so I do have a couple weird questions though. One, how old is he?
Yeah, right. Because maybe like in his 20s, or I don't know. Because like there's okay, so when like they finally like when you know in the opening or whatever, we got Vincent Price and you know the house looks you know kind of more newish and just whatever. But then by the time we get our main protagonist like journeying through this mansion, you know, we got all the cobwebs like built up. It almost looks like it's been untouched for you know 50 to 100 years. But I don't know, like that's kind of where I get confused as to how old he is. Because, you know, he was probably in his 20s or early 30s, maybe when he was like, you know, cast the role. But, you know, maybe he's only portraying like his 20s because he is still so young. And, you know, even if you were raised without an education, like there is some sort of, you know, wisdom that comes with age. So that's why I was thinking he's maybe younger.
So this also leads to my question. Is he human? Because I always, watching this movie, thought of him as, like, immortal. Like, he didn't age. And I don't know why, but I think because at the end, with, like, Winona Ryder and her old makeup, old woman makeup, and I assume that he just, like, is living forever. And there's something about him that isn't particularly human. Because Vincent Price, in one of his last on-screen roles, always playing him his fucking self, I swear to God, this man. But, like, he makes him. So what does that mean? Like, I don't...
Well, yeah, and you just brought up the point that Winona Ryder's character is, like, really old by the end of it. So, like, we either got Edward Scissorhands up there in the castle being 100 or, you know... But, yeah, maybe you're right. I think you have a good point there.
Well, because then I couldn't stop thinking about the mechanics of his hands. Like, okay... So, are they connected to nerve endings? Like, I got, like, really into, like, are they connected to nerve endings, or is he mechanical?
What did he eat?
We don't... Well, he eats, but, like, you don't see any of his skin.
When
like,
he was in his castle. What did he
that's
eat?
also what I thought. Bugs? Spider webs? Well, like, it's just, like, I have so many... like thoughts about him as an entity rather than a person, and that sounds terrible because it others him more than he already is. Because I think in this movie, like he already is such an other, and he looks human. But I think there is something about him that isn't quite human because he's made. We don't see any of his skin except for his head. So like, what is going on under this very elaborate like leather outfit, like very leather setup? Like it's.
How stinky is that leather outfit?
Stank.
Yeah.
Stank. That man has never taken a shower. How the fuck is he going to wash his hair?
How does he take it off? It's so skin tight onto his body. It's like it's glued on there.
So that's the thing. Like, could he be like some kind of cyborg android creature? Again, no, I don't have nothing to back this up.
That could be where they were. That could be an intention of Burton's. I mean, like we watch a lot of movies where we hear about these like or like, I don't know, was it Cronenberg that just put out this movie where it was like organisms, like artificial organisms, like integrating with human consciousness and like there being like that. Like,
Crimes of the Future wasn't really. It was like human biology morphing more than anything else, more than like things morphing together.
I see. But there was that like hierarchical system where like the people who were one kind of like specialness were seen as like greater than the other, or like being more special or more powerful. So like, you know, a lot of we see like similar styles of those stories, and it just begs the question like what is human consciousness? Like, you know, if we take you know, cyborg hands and attach them to, you know, maybe, you know, again, we're just assuming like maybe behind the scenes, Vincent Price's character was meant to try to invent like the heart. And so maybe like, you know, he's attaching these other things to it by like not really showcase. Like that would have been a cool little like story drop. If like we knew maybe he was just trying to like build consciousness or build like a real heart to something like, that's kind of where my head goes, is like he did try to like make the first human, and you're right, maybe he is sort of immortal or like supernatural in some kind of way, you know, but like maybe just like so many times in cinema we're kind of seeing that from like an antagonistic point of view that like hardly do we ever see our protagonist kind of being raised that way.
Yeah,
because I just kept thinking that either it's really inappropriate that he is in love with a 17-year-old, or it's inappropriate that the woman is seducing him because he is, you know, the 17-year-old's age. It's like either one of these things One or the other is really inappropriate, depending on how old this character really is. Johnny Depp was 27 at the time, by the way.
Lose situation here in terms of age and relationships.
Yeah.
What if he's older than everybody? What if he's like older than the hills and he just like has lived up there forever? He's like God's rejected creature living in the attic.
I'll buy that for $1.
I'll do it. This movie fucks me up, guys. Oh my God. Anyway.
It scarred me for life.
Well, and like, I just think that's something that I also thought about a lot was how Edward is such an interesting figure of rejecting patriarchy. Like, he is a male figure, but he is constantly associated with women. Like, he is always cutting the women's hair. He's taking care, and like, you know, and then he's cutting women's hair and he's grooming the dogs. But then he's also like stumbling into the male side of things with trimming the gardens and like doing the kind of maintenance of the lawn.
Being the can opener.
Being like, yeah, like he becomes this, and he shish kebabs, like he puts all the vegetables, like he's the grill dad with all the shish kebabs on his fingers. And then we have the boyfriend, Jim, is that his name? Jim, the boyfriend, who is like the representation of toxic masculinity. Like, he's blonde, he's got the cheerleader girlfriend, he's giant and buff and a shitlord. And then you have Edward, who is this complete like alien figure in this world where he has no concept of like patriarchy, of these gender roles. He just kind of stumbles into things and does his own thing and is threatening this societal order. And I think, and again, Jim is threatened. Again, it would be more literally because of his like kind of thing for Kim and on Kim's slowly growing thing for Edward, but he is this threat in a way. And again, like he's useful, but then when he's no longer useful, he becomes a threat to everybody. So it's like this very interesting way of seeing him as this like a threat to patriarchy and heteronormativity, going back again to the queerness in this like queer reading of this film.
You're right that Edward doesn't notice that, because like right before the boyfriend comes in guns blazing at the end, like he's having that intimate conversation with Winona Ryder, and like he's asking if the boyfriend's okay, you know, like somebody who's like, you know, just bullying him and ridiculing him, and it's just like, and you know, and Edward's just wondering if like that guy's okay, you know, like his biggest enemy. Also,
what great casting for Jim with Anthony Michael Hall, who, you know, at this point is known for 16 Candles, you know, The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, like being a nerd and that kind of geeky character. And to go from that to being the jock that is like everything that he wasn't as character growing in like the 80s. It's such great casting.
Yeah, he pulled off that new Halloween movie really well too, because I think that was like one of the last movies he came out in.
Evil Dies Tonight.
Evil Dies Tonight.
But it really is wild that they're the same person. I always forget that's the like from 16 Candles and Breakfast Club to that. Like, dear God, my man, you really ate your Wheaties and bulked the fuck up. Like, holy shit, you big boy.
Honey.
Yeah. Oh, did we mention how this is like Frankenstein and Beauty and the Beast all in one? How it is like a Frankenstein movie? I wanted to bring that up. I was like totally meant to bring that up earlier. How this is Frankenstein.
Yeah.
But not.
This is definitely like Tim Burton's fascination with 30s Universal monster movies. Because this, I mean, the entire plot, like if you take the main plot points, it is literally Frankenstein. You know, man creates being gets out in the world, doesn't understand how the world operates, hurts someone, ends up being chased by the townspeople back up to his castle with pitchforks. Here it's a bunch of pastel colored women that chase him up the hill, but like it is literally the meta story of Frankenstein played out here. And I think it's such a fascinating kind of modernization of that story, I would say.
Well said.
I definitely agree. And like it has like a not cuter, but like a brighter aesthetic. So it doesn't feel as Frankenstein, but it does have those story beats. And I also thought Beauty and the Beast, because I love the animated movie growing up, but like when he kills like it's like the Gaston and Beast standoff of like, again, the threat to heteronormativity and like the pinnacle of toxic masculinity duking it out in a giant castle, and one of them gets thrown out of a window or like thrown off of a roof. I was like, Beauty and the Beast. And it's very interesting how it has those gothic aspects to it. And again, you got Vincent Price in it. I know he's not Universal, but he's like, you know, he's a horror legend and he's in a lot of that stuff. So you have him in it as the scientist, and it's like, oh, okay. Now that I have more horror knowledge as an adult and I watch more movies, I see how this is basically a Universal monster movie, but with more colors.
Nice. Yeah, exactly.
Before we wrap up, Thomas, does this movie still scare you as an adult? Does it still bring you existential dread?
No, it gives me a lot of like comfort because, you know, similar to you, like I kind of grew up always being bullied around, and like, you know, I didn't really have that many friends growing up. And so
same.
Like I look at this as a very cathartic, sort of just emotional roller coaster type of story. So, you know, I get a lot of comfort from it just because it's just a great story to tell from somebody else's perspective that isn't so stereotypical. And, you know, for that reason, I think it's one that most, you know, will and or would enjoy, you know, if they haven't seen it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap up and give this our rating out of 5. Terry, how many perfectly manicured poodles out of 5 do you give Edward Scissorhands?
You know, rewatching this and then having this conversation, I think this is a rare kind of almost perfect movie. Like it's one that I wouldn't change a thing. And I almost, for a lot of times when I was watching this film for this podcast, I actually just put my laptop that I was taking notes on down because I was just so enraptured with what was happening on screen. I think, I think for me, I honestly think this is 5, what is it? 5 perfectly manicured poodles with 5 perfectly coiffed, housewife hairdos. Like, I think this movie is perfect. I can't give it anything less than 5. What about you, Mary Beth?
Oh, it's hard because the emotional impact just like kicks me in the teeth and it makes me not want to watch the movie. And like, that's personal. That's not anything on the movie, but like I was watching it and I like kept wincing. And it's hard to explain why it makes me feel this way. But I think if a movie that this beautiful is able to elicit that reaction, I think it needs to get 5 perfectly manicured poodles out of 5. Like, I think the effect it's had on me for so long, I think, you know, Tim Burton with all of his problems and weird politics, you know, made something gorgeous with this movie. So it's 5. Thomas, you have the final word. How many perfectly manicured poodles out of 5 do you give Edward Scissorhands?
I'll give it 5 perfect manicured poodles for sure because like, you know, I'm pretty active on Letterboxd, which is like, you know, it's kind of like it's just like a movie database app. And you know, I've logged like 8,000 movies on there, but I keep track of like my top 100 favorite films. And this is definitely up there on my top 100 favorites of all time. So yeah, I'll give it 5 out of 5.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us to talk about Edward Scissorhands. Because again, this is, I think, maybe the second time I've seen it, and it was an experience to revisit. So I appreciate that. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up that you can plug or share? What's going on in your life?
Sweet. Well, first, yes, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun, diving down the Edward Scissorhands rabbit hole with y'all. You can find me on Letterboxd at the Movie Archive. I also have an Instagram at the Movie Archive where I basically collect and share my hard copy media collection, action figures, the whole, like, kind of like everything just around movies. And then, besides that, my website, thomas-burke.com, you can, find a lot of my work and keep up to date with kind of what's new or what's coming up. And besides that, I'm working on a few developments at the moment, besides like a couple that are under wraps right now. I'm set to co-direct a found footage sequel to a rather popular horror film that came out a couple of years ago. So we're going to center that around like social media, and that'll be kind of something bigger that I'm working on soon. And I'm also really excited about it. We're going to be working with a couple other directors in the found footage industry.
That's cool.
Yeah. I'm editing a found footage feature right now called Ghost of Hiroshima that I think is, it's one of my favorite editing jobs I've had to date. It's just like, I got this raw footage in and it just scared the crap out of me. And usually, you kind of need a little bit of like sound effects or like color stuff added to things before your movie starts looking spooky. But man, this was just a really successful horror film. I'm really excited to kind of be attached to it, and so I'm happy and stoked for that to come out. And then I just acted with Isaac Rodriguez in Mr. Creep. That'll be coming out soon, and a couple other found footage movies. But just you're
just a busy man.
Yeah, still diving in that found footage rabbit hole for sure. And I do have some big hopes for other stories that I want to tell that aren't found footage. Like, we were just talking a lot about just fish out of water characters. And one thing I've been doing is researching rather heavily into Mormon fundamentalism, because I think there's an untold story there. And so I've been spending about 4 to 5 years researching the religion and just that kind of private sect of Mormon Latter-day Saints.
Wow.
The fundamentalists.
Have you watched Keep Sweet on Netflix yet?
I haven't watched it yet. The one that just came out, right?
Oh, you need to watch it if you're researching fundamentalist LDS. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. I've been researching it for since 2013. So I've been really kind of just going knee deep. I acted what really got me into this is I got cast in a theater production where we were doing a story pertaining to Mormon fundamentalism. And so that got me into being cast as one of the leads on that production really got me just researching so much into the religion and the culture that it just inspired me afterwards to just to get into this. It got me back into screenwriting. It really kind of reinforced my the kinds of stories that I think deserve to be told or need to be told. So it's something I'm really excited about, but it's also something I'm just gonna kind of handle really cautiously because it pertains to real sensitive subject matter. So I knew that if I ever wanted to make a film about it, that I would need to know everything about it first. So I kind of feel like I'm maybe coming on the other side of that research now, and hopefully one day we'll kind of tell my story about it.
Hell yeah.
Cool. Hell yeah. Well, listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Edward Scissorhands? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm a Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.